The recently released report into organized crime on the African continent, the Africa Organized Crime Index, published by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crime, paints a very troubling picture of South Africa becoming a hub, or is a hub, for the global illicit drug trade. South Africa becoming an increasingly bigger player in the global drug scene. Jason Eligh is the senior expert and thematic lead on drugs at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crime. And I look at your report, I think as South Africa as some sort of logistics hub, like the major parcel delivery services, that illicit drugs are brought into South Africa, they processed and packaged, and then gets distributed to other parts of the world. Is my analysis of that particular part of your report accurate, Jason? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Lester. Yeah, you're absolutely right. South Africa is a major consumer market these days for cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. There's also a great demand in the country that's been around for quite a while, and this is making South Africa an important market for the inflow of drugs, just for domestic consumption. But as you mentioned, it's also become a key transit location for the shipping of these drugs to markets around the world. It's a convenient waypoint for the eastward movement of cocaine and meth, and for the westward movement of heroin.
Why is it seemingly easier for drugs, particularly, let's focus on the cocaine market, why is it seemingly easier to transit these drugs to South Africa and from here up along a northern sea route to Europe, or across then the Indian Ocean to Australia? If I were to just use, as straight as a crow flies, that would be an easier route. Why is South Africa used as this processing or logistics hub for global cocaine trade?
Well, there are a number of reasons. First, South Africa is a reasonably well-developed and stable nation on the continent and at the foot of the continent, as it were. It's got a very long coastline that has weak surveillance. It's also got large international ports. Think Durban Port, for example. Durban Port handles around 3 million containers each year. And we must remember that at the most, only about 2% of containers can be checked. Then we've got a reasonably reliable road system in South Africa that makes for great overland transport to neighboring countries. And I think also an important feature is that there are corrupted and complicit elements in enforcement bodies in South Africa that are enabling this trade to continue.
Most recently, there was 150 million rand cocaine bust, parcels disguised as meat seized at Durban port. Is it simply because, as you say, only 2% of containers are actually checked? We have seemingly very porous borders, customs officials who may or not be complicit, who may be implicated, maybe with their knowledge, without their knowledge. It just seems like a very, very wrong, improper attraction that we're getting when it comes to international crime syndicates essentially investing in South Africa as a logistics hub.
Well, you've got it right. I mean, South Africa is increasingly viewed as a transit location that is quite amenable for organized criminal groups, whether they're shifting cocaine up to Europe or across to Australia, or moving meth or heroin in other directions. And just for those reasons you mentioned.
Let's talk about other illicit substances. You spoke about the transit of substances like heroin from the east, also through South Africa and to other parts of the world. Same modus, same operation that is used in illicit drugs that is transported from South Africa to from South America to South Africa.
Well, the heroin trade's a little bit different, of course, originating in Afghanistan, and it's taking the benefit of the long history of maritime trade that has plied the eastern coast of Africa So you're seeing a lot of dhows and other small vessels shipping a ton or two at a time of heroin down through the region. So the heroin market has actually been much longer established in the region than something, say, like cocaine or meth. And the organizations involved tend to be a little bit different between heroin and cocaine.
Is this some precursor to some sort of proto-narco state? If we're looking at the sheer numbers that are, firstly, those that are seized, often into the hundreds of millions of rands in shipments, and that is obviously a drop in the ocean that makes its way through our borders. Is this some sort of proto-narco state that we're talking about here in South Africa?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that it's right to be concerned. I think in terms of the volume of drugs that are moving through the country, we simply have to look at the local demand. For example, we've got in South Africa around 400,000 people who use heroin, 350,000 who use cocaine, either powder or crack, and another 300,000 who use meth. So that's quite an insatiable demand that has to be met, let alone those drugs that are moving to South Africa being repackaged and moved elsewhere. So I think it's on a trajectory that is one that needs some serious intervention now before it does become a narco state in that sense.
What
But I
then?
don't think we're there yet.
But what's then the connection between the illicit abalone trade, the trade in rare and endangered succulent plants to rhino horn? These are all largely connected, and it is an illicit economy that operates very much like a business. They have interests in all various illicit goods, not just the illicit drug trade, but that including abalone, succulents, rhino horns, everything that would be considered part of the illicit economy. It's broadly all connected.
Yeah, you're right. And if I think it's important that we look at these things as a business, because moving drugs or other illicit goods is a very lucrative business. These things are at their base level commodities. So organized criminal groups are going to move commodities that are going to make them money, because obviously that's their interest in this whole process. And the fact that South Africa is a great destination through which and to which to move drugs, it's also a key destination when we talk about environmental products, whether you're talking about ivory or succulent plants or other things. And generally, when we're talking about these things moving, there is some convergence between commodities and groups involved, to the point that, yeah, you might have a group that's moving a number of different things here and there, but it's just good business.
Every few weeks we have an announcement of some sort of massive bust that happens at a port of entry, or a container truck was stopped along the N3 highway between Durban and Johannesburg, or something along the N1 or the N2 heading towards Cape Town. Very big numbers in terms of rand value that we're talking about. But are any of these interventions at all successful if South Africa is seen as this great investment destination for the illicit economy?
Well, if we look at drugs, for example, there's been a study that estimated the consumption of cocaine in the country was around 20 tons. The consumption of meth was closer to 50 tons, and the consumption of heroin was around 60 tons. So if we keep those figures in mind, and this isn't even discussing the volumes of drugs that move through the country that don't even stop there, you're talking about a flow of goods that is just enormous. And these interdictions that do occur, even the ones that have big numbers, maybe a ton or two of cocaine, for example, really have little to no effect on the market as a whole in the country.
Really appreciate your time, Jason Eligh, senior expert and thematic lead on drugs at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crime. Really appreciate your time.